Chapter 22. Today we'll be learning about safety for sterile processing. The objective of this chapter is to basically explain the importance of safety and risk management in the sterile processing department, review 3 common workplace hazards, explain the importance of ergonomics and healthcare awareness for sterile processing techs, identify strategies for accident prevention, describe special safety precautions for handling ethylene oxide, and discuss the basics of a healthcare facility internal and external disaster plans. Basically, the introduction to this is it has been said that safety is no accident, and the statement couldn't be any truer, especially for healthcare professionals who are responsible for keeping patients, employees, and visitors free from injury. Safety requires ongoing education, safeguards, proper planning, and the combined implementation of safety systems to reduce risk, prevention, injury, and save lives. The sterile processing tech decontamination area is a perfect example of how safety systems and due diligence are essential for ensuring safety. The decon area operates in the presence of pathogenic microorganisms which present a real risk to those who enter. Engineering controls such as managed air pressure, physical separation from clean areas, and personal protective equipment (PPE) are provided to minimize risk. Employees must be educated in biohazard safety and follow specific regulations, such as those established by the OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. This chapter identifies common risks found in the sterile processing department, work areas, and identifies ways to minimize the risk for injury. This term might be on your test. Risk management is a method used to assess the risk of a specific activity and develop programs to reduce the risk. It also involves injury prevention and claims management, the settlement, defense, and prevention of lawsuits. That term right there, risk management, you might see on your test. Basically, all it means is ways to prevent getting hurt. There are 3 types of occupational hazards: physical, biological, and chemical. So general physical hazards include those related to ergonomics: slips, falls, electrical, and sharps. Ergonomics is the process of changing work or working conditions to reduce physical stress. SP techs are exposed to many ergonomic stress factors such as repetitive motion, lifting, and pushing. That might be on your test, the term ergonomics. Process of changing work or working conditions to reduce employee stress. Ergonomic stressors that employees may encounter include force, repetition, awkward positions, vibration, and contact stress. Exposure to these stressors can cause numerous problems, including ligament sprains, joint and tension, and tendon inflammation, pinched nerves, herniated spinal disc, and other injuries. Like I said, we deal with a lot of labor. We're basically a blue-collar job. You're going to be lifting, you're going to be pushing, you're going to be grabbing heavy items off shelves, and so on. So it's all about work ergonomics to prevent yourself from getting injured, especially dealing with chemicals, slips and falls, and so forth, and decontamination. Having the right shoes that fit your needs is one of the most important things I always value. That's why I always tell you guys invest in shoes for comfortability. You will be standing for the majority of your 8-hour shift, so the last thing you need to do is create a health hazard for you later down the line. A good example of a proper work ergonomic, placing heavier instrumentation on the middle shelf in a storage rack, because if you put it too low, that requires you to bend more, possibly getting a blown hernia. If you put it too high, the possibility of the item falling on your head. So you want to place it in the middle shelf, basically waist level. When you're dealing with multiple instruments, and you have to have them push in your case cart or your dirty instrument push cart, you want to make sure those wheels move freely. At times, especially with it being washed so many times, the wheels tend to rust out, tend to not move correctly, so you always want to put that out of repair in the event those wheels don't move freely, just to prevent yourself from basically tipping over or snagging onto something and then like dragging across the hallway, and the items end up falling. So you want to make sure those wheels are always moving freely. And you want to work in a manner in SPD that benefits you. So for me, I'm left-handed, so I make sure whatever I do is ergonomics to my left hand. So if I'm in decontamination, you deal with a lot of sharps, you deal with a lot of dirty instruments, obviously. So in the event you deal with a suture, a blade, make sure you dispose of it. You don't try to grab it. Use an instrument, use a needle holder. If you see a suture in your tray, grab that needle holder so you can grasp that needle holder, that suture with that needle holder, and then put it in the red biohazard bin. You don't want to try to grab it with your actual hand and glove and watch it puncture the glove and give you a laceration on your skin. Because the potential of infection is super high since we're dealing with dirty instrumentation with other people's blood. So always find a way to prevent yourself from getting poked or cut. We have red biohazard bins all over decontamination. In the event you do run into a sharp, let your management know that there was a sharp in your tray so they can take pictures and notify the OR. And then from there, you dispose of it into the red biohazard bins. As you guys know, in decontamination, we deal with a bunch of chemicals. So, we want to prevent any health hazard for our workers, for yourself. So, OSHA has established a permissible exposure limit. It's called PELs, permissible exposure limits, for many chemicals used in sterilant and disinfectant formulations. These include ethylene oxide, EO, hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, and others. Glutathione is a chemical commonly used as a high-level disinfectant in SPD. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, the NIOSH, recommends that exposure to glutathione be under 0.2 parts per million, ppm, time-weighted average, TWA, over an 8-hour work shift. Basically meaning don't be exposed to it for too long. Easiest way to memorize that. Because that scent from glutathione may be super strong, may irritate the skin, especially if you guys have eczema. I have eczema. My eyes tend to get irritated really, really bad dealing with that chemical. So you want to make sure you're in adequate ventilation areas. So basically, adequate ventilation systems, establish safe work operating procedures, provide PPE. You want to wear PPE at all times dealing with these type of chemicals. You don't want this to touch your skin. And then your hospital will try to implement any other methods to ensure that occupational exposure limits are not exceeded in the workplace. A lot of hospitals provide mechanical monitoring systems. Basically, it's a little monitor that you put on your scrubs, or they may have a system where they can detect chemical levels in the department, and it'll alarm if it's too much in the air lingering. If that ever alarms, basically your management would stop procedures, stop what you're doing, and then notify engineering to see if they can ventilate that chemical out, just because it can prevent a type of situation where you may faint, because like I said, working with HLD, high level disinfectant, it will fatigue you. That odor, that smell, it can possibly make you throw up. I've never seen anyone throw up, but I've heard stories of people throwing up from the scent, being exposed for it too long. The worst that I ever had was I felt like I wanted to faint being in it too long. There was a day where I was doing it for 6 hours, dealing with high level disinfectant, cleaning scopes, and told my manager, I was like, I'm not feeling too well. And then sure enough, it was just long exposure to HLD. But wearing PPE and so forth, it helps prevent that. So always follow the IFU, and let your manager know in the event you're not feeling too well, and then they can figure out a action plan to prevent any type of workers' comp scenario. Since we deal with a lot of chemicals, we also got to deal with the fact that the possibility of fire hazards are always going to be around. In order for a fire to happen, you basically need three types of scenarios: a combustible or flammable substance, alcohol is a good example, very, very high flammable, a source of oxygen, and a source of ignition. There's been events where surgeries, patients catching on fire because an instrument um, caused a spark, and then dealing with oxygen tanks and so on. That's where the patient would basically catch on fire. In decontamination, I've never seen a scenario where yet, knock on wood, where we dealt with a fire scenario. We dealt with high steam coming out and causing the fire alarm to go on, but we never actually dealt with an actual fire where I would have to use a fire extinguisher and so on. But it does happen. I'm not saying it's not. It's not that it can happen, but you just got to make sure you know what to do in the event there were to be a fire. So if there were to be a fire or some type of explosion that causes a flame, you basically would run to your nearest exits, because that's where a fire extinguisher would be placed. And then with that said being, you would get the fire extinguisher, look at the object that you're trying to put out, pull the pin, aim the nozzle, squeeze the lever, and sweep side to side till the fire basically is no longer there. Within that time frame, you want to pull the fire alarm. Usually hospitals are so sensitive, fire alarms, where any type of heavy smoke, the fire alarm will go on. So you don't necessarily have to worry about that in the hospital, but always pull a fire alarm in the event you were to walk into a scenario where there is a fire. So you basically, like I said, 1, you pull the pin, 2, you aim the nozzle, 3, you squeeze the lever, 4, you sweep side to side. That method is called PASS. That will be on your test for sure. When you get into a hospital, get hired, you have to take a fire class provided by the hospital. So you'll learn how to do the PASS method, possibly with a fire instructor. I've never used the fire extinguisher method. I've never been into a fire scenario, thankfully, but it's always good to know, always good to memorize. Always good to have in your house too. Get a little mini fire extinguisher. Dealing with cooking and so on, the most common, as long as it's not electrical, the most common fires can be put out with a fire extinguisher. And then when you guys get hired onto a facility, you guys get hired onto a hospital, in the event there is a fire, you're going to have a fire response plan. Basically, it's called RACE. It's rescue or remove. Any patient, guest, or staff needing assistance must be evacuated per the facility's emergency evacuation plan. And then you're going to have to alert or alarm, activate the fire pull station, call 911, and any internal emergency services. And C is confine or contain. Once everyone is removed from the area, close off or contain the fire as much as possible by closing the doors. The hospitals are regulated to keep fires within with the fire doors that we have at a hospital. Those fire doors are legit. In the event there is a fire, you close those doors. I'm not too sure exactly how many hours those doors are good for before it actually melts and burns down. All hospitals are different. But let's say if there is a fire in decontamination, those doors are regulated to keep that fire only in decon, so it doesn't go past to another department, to another floor, and so on. But that's only for a certain amount of time. I don't think you can leave a fire flame on there for a month. Eventually it's gonna break down that door. But for the time you're trying to evacuate, you should be fine once you start closing those doors, and then it stops the spread. Especially with oxygen moving, circulating with our HVAC system. Closing the door is the biggest thing you can do, but making sure it's safe as well when you close that door. You don't want to leave anyone in there, so you want to make sure you get everybody out. That's the rescue part. So yeah, and then E extinguish or evacuate using the fire pass extinguisher attempt to put out the fire. We went over that already. The pass method. Um, just make sure you're comfortable performing that. Don't be nervous. Take a deep breath when you use it, and then just keep spraying till the fire extinguisher is no longer um, can no longer activate. And in the event you do use a fire extinguisher, I've used one, but not in necessarily SPD, but in general, because they teach you in fire class. There's Once you start spraying, sweeping it side to side, just let off the whole entire fire extinguisher. You want to make sure that fire is completely done. Don't give it any opportunity to keep growing. So yeah, so you're gonna know in the hospital the RACE method: rescue or remove, alert or alarm, confine or contain, or extinguish or evacuate. That might be on your test. So just remember, anything fire related, you're gonna have two types of abbreviations. It's gonna be RACE and PASS. RACE is dealing with the response of the fire, and PASS is dealing with the fire extinguisher. Make sure you understand those two, so you don't get confused when you take the board exam. Like earlier, we spoke about EO sterilizers. We talked about low temperature sterilizers. I haven't gone over that chapter yet with you guys, but throughout the whole entire 16 weeks, we've gone over low temperature and steam sterilization. Obviously, steam sterilization, you gotta deal with high heat, high temp, so you don't want to just grab those instrumentation out barehanded. You want to use a autoclave glove, which is provided by the hospital, so you don't have to worry about it. So now dealing with low temperature, you want to make sure you're not exposed for too long with the door open of the chemical used. We don't use EO sterilizers in hospitals that I have been. All the 21 hospitals I've been at, I've never dealt with EO, but we deal with hydrogen peroxide. But common factors, same, very, very similar, but slightly different. You want to when dealing with an EO sterilizer, if you ever do get that chance to work with an EO sterilizer, you want to make sure the action level of exposure to a harmful substance or any other hazard at which an employer must take required precautions to protect the workers. It is typically 1/2 the permissible exposure limit, PEL, the PEL. So basically stating, just don't be exposed for too long of that sterilant to prevent any type of health disaster. OSHA amends its rule on occupational exposure to EO by adding a 5 ppm short-term exposure limit, STEL, STEL, over a 15-minute period. The STEL is typically related to tasks such as performing sterilizer maintenance. We don't do maintenance, but back then they did in the 1980s. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. But basically, STEL is it's defined as the maximum concentration of a chemical to which workers may be exposed continuously up to 15 minutes without danger to health or work efficiency and safety. So in the event you're sterilizing that item, it is sterilized, it's done. It has a cool down period. As you open that door, you might get a whiff of that sterilant, that chemical. You don't want to exceed over 15 minutes with that door open. So get those items out, let it rest on the sterile storage cart or shelf, and then go on from there. Close that door right away so you're not exposed for too long. All EO sterilizers, low temp sterilizers, there's great adequate ventilation, so you don't necessarily have to worry about it, but you never know. So it's always about precaution. There's always an action plan to prevent in the event you're exposed for too long of that sterilant. So just be mindful on that. When you're dealing with low temperature stuff, hydrogen peroxide is very, very toxic. So you want to make sure once you open up that door, you grab the items out, close the door right away. So the rest of this chapter is basically about common knowledge, things you'll hear. Basically disaster preparedness. One of the scenarios will basically be a internal disaster. Internal disaster is any situation with the potential to cause harm or injury to the healthcare facility, employees, or where the loss of utilities may drastically impact departmental operations. Examples of internal disasters include a hazardous chemical spill or leak, loss of power, or failure of a utility such as water, electricity, or steam. So my hospital, every time it rains heavy, we somehow always get a crazy leak. Um, I guess because we're so close to the main level of the floor or the basement. So only time it would get into a internal disaster is if we can't fix the problem right away. We don't have an action plan. Usually we're pretty good at catching it, so preventing it from getting any much more bigger. So when you get hired onto a hospital, they'll teach you about that. They'll teach you about disasters and what to do in the event and so on. So disaster internal is defined as situation with the potential to cause harm or injury to the sterile processing or other employees, patients, visitors, or where the loss of utilities may drastically impact departmental operations. So a good example is when it got super hot in the past summer, we were losing, the city was having blackouts continuously. Our action plan as a hospital, we have generators, huge generators. So in the event we have blackout, we can literally turn the generator system kicks on right away within 30 seconds, and we're good to go, resume, and so on. I don't know how many hours the generator can run on before we lose that power, but usually it kicks on before um, it becomes a huge disaster. But that is our action plan. So, good example. In the event of an internal disaster, we have to have an action plan. That's our action plan, to have a generator large enough to accommodate the whole hospital. An external disaster is a situation where activities outside the facility impact departmental or facility operations. Examples that may necessitate activation of an external disaster plan may include earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, or other events that result in large numbers of seriously injured patients being sent to the facility. So basically, a situation in which activities internal to the facility affects the departmental or facility operations. So in the event there's a crazy shooting outside, that's an external disaster. In the event there's a large earthquake and the walls start to crack and so on, that's an external disaster. So you will find action plans. So let's say if there is an event happened to my hospital, since I'm so close to downtown LA, where there was a shooting, all the exit doors were closed. All the entrances were closed. Security guards were everywhere. So the target or the individual trying to cause harm couldn't get in, hopefully. So that's the whole point. That's the action plan, is to prevent any type of extremity coming back into the hospital. In the event, let's just say if there was a shooting in your facility you work at, most hospital doors are keypad entry, badge entry. In the event something were to happen, make sure that that door is closed and you hide. You play hide and go seek. You don't want to risk being a hero and lose your life over something that is not of as close value as you think you should. I'm all about protecting family and so on, but if I'm at work, my job is the least of my worries is if something were to happen. I'm going to get out of there as fast as I can. So just be mindful on that. Thank God hospitals have nothing but crazy entrances and exit ways where you need a badge access. So, or a secret pin or code and so on. So, conclusion of this chapter. SP techs play an important role in everyday healthcare facility safety program. It's important that all SP employees know the expectations and are able to perform efficiently and calmly during any type of situation that may arise for the safety of patients, visitors, and other employees and departmental staff. Training and safety drills must be taken seriously as it can as should the adoption of work safe habits that help ensure preparedness for any unplanned emergency. Every year, every 6 months, every 9 months, depends on the facility or hospital, you'll have drills of that nature. You'll have a fire drill, you'll have in the event, a active shooting drill, and so on. So you'll have HR come in, they'll teach you what to do, and so on and so on and so on. So you'll always be alert. They'll teach you what exit doors are are locked and so forth to prevent any type of internal or external disaster from happening. So, with that said being, that's the end of chapter 22.